Hello friends, I am Nisha Sharma, Associate Professor, Department of English. The topic under discussion today is My Grandmother's House is Stanza-wise Analysis. Kamla Das is recognized as one of India's most influential female poets. She helped promote the cause of feminism in the 1960s and 70s, producing work related to family and home and giving it a modern twist by introducing sex and the body into the political narrative. Now, an introduction to my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house is a poem written by a very famous Indian author, Kamla Das. The poem is written by Kamla in the memory of her grandmother. She tells about how she spent her childhood with her grandmother. Kamla Das considered those memories to be the best in her life and she desires to get them. She also grieves about her loss. Lines 1 to 5. The poem My Grandmother's House, which can be read in full here, shows Kamla Das' intense love and attachment to it. She suffers from an acute sense of alienation after having left this place after her marriage. The poet now lives in a big city after her marriage, a remote place from her grandmother's house. She is reminded of her grandmother's house where she spent her memorable childhood. Ironically, it is the only place where she received love from her grandmother. The death of the grandmother is even mourned by the house to which she was emotionally attached. A death-like silence reigned in the house after her exit from this world. It seems that the grandmother was the very soul of this house. Being deserted, the snakes could be seen among books in the library of the house. At that point in time, she was too young to read those books, which looked quite horrible and repulsive like snakes. She was almost frozen with fear at the passing away of her grandmother and seemed cold like the moon. The very opening lines of the poem capture alive the poet's mood of nostalgia. She is reminded of the happiest days of her childhood, which she spent in the company of her grandmother. She was deeply attached to her grandmother, who was very caring and affectionate to her. She was emotionally destabilized after the death of her grandmother and felt almost heartbroken. The intensity of her grief is suggestively conveyed by the ellipse in the form of a few dots in this section of the poem. It was her disenchantment with her loveless marriage that reminded her of her grandmother's pure and selfless love. Line number 6 to 12. In the above lines of the poem, My Grandmother's House, the poet defines her relationship with her grandmother in a very moving manner. Kamla Das is reminded of the happiest days of her childhood, which she spent with her grandmother. The poet was deeply attached to her grandmother, who was very caring and affectionate to her. She was emotionally shattered after the death of her grandmother, who had been the chief source of inspiration in her life. The poet often longs to visit her grandmother's house, to which she was emotionally attached since her childhood. It had been a place of security and protection, which is sadly missing in her new house in the city. She would like to peep through the dust-ridden or colored panes of windows that were shut after the death of the grandmother. She would like to listen and feel the still atmosphere prevailing in the house. It is this longing to revisit her grandmother's house that adds to her sense of frustration and hopelessness. The darkness of her grandmother's house can have no terrifying impact on her. She would like to gather some darkness, some memories of the grandmother's house, and bring them to her present city residence. The very memories of her grandmother's house will have a soothing impact on her loveless and hopeless married life. The poet is in a mood of reminiscence and recreates the plight of the grandmother's house after her departure from the scene of life. She gives us the very feel of the house in its state of neglect and desertion. The poet has used the simile of a brooding dog to show her inability to pay a visit to her grandmother's house. She has employed suggestive visual imagery of blind eyes of the windows and the frozen air to convey the idea of death and desperation. Lines 12 to 16. In these lines of my grandmother's house, the poet says how her frustration and disenchantment in the marital life forced her to go into for an extramarital relationship. The poet often longs to visit her grandmother's house to which she was emotionally attached since her childhood. Unlike her miserable city life with her husband, it had been a place of security and genuine love for her. Here, the poet informs her dear husband that he can never believe the intensity of love that she received from her grandmother. He can never realize that she was extremely proud of her grandmother's house, where she was deeply loved by her grandmother. It is her separation from her grandmother's house after marriage that has ruined her life forever. It is loveless and hopeless married life that has crippled her sense of pride and love, which she used to have in her grandmother's house. She has become a beggar for love who knocks helplessly at a stranger's door to receive, at least in a small measure. She has almost lost her way in search of genuine and selfless love. Kamla Das exposes the futility of loveless and hopeless marital relationships in these five concluding lines of the poem. It shows the agony and humiliation of a married woman who is forced to seek extramarital relationships to seek love for her emotional satisfaction. It is the mood of nostalgia that dominates the closing phase of the poem. The poet is reminded of her grandmother's house where received love and safety in her childhood. She has lost all her identity and freedom in her loveless relationship. Thank you.